West. Last night's debate might not have had a clear winner, but there is no the amount of work that goes into coaching party leaders for head-to-head discussions. Two people with experience of those behind-the-scenes preparations are Kezia Dugdale, the former Scottish Labour leader, and Graham Davies, who's a political presentation consultant, and they join me now. Good morning to you both. So, 51-49 split in the Snap poll from the public, Graham Davies. How did you think they fared?
Well, I felt it between Corbyn and Johnson, it was a grubby, low-class, low-scoring draw. But in my opinion, the real losers were ITV because their ridiculously rushed format meant that serious issues were somewhat trivialised, and it meant that the whole exercise changed from being a serious debate into a frantic farce, a sort of pre-Christmas pantomime. OK, we'll
talk a little bit more about the format in just a moment. But Kezia Dugdale, what was your verdict?
I think the audience were the real winner last night, particularly when you heard them laughing at both of the two main contenders. I think that showed a degree of participation and exposed some of the issues at the heart of this election campaign. They did that around trustworthiness on the Prime Minister and again on Brexit for Jeremy Corbyn. These debates are incredibly important. Analysis of what happened in 2017 by the Electoral Reform Society shows us that around a third of people said that TV debates influence how they make up their minds and how they vote in elections. So they're an important part of a functioning and healthy democracy.
Do you agree with Graham, though, that we didn't learn much from last night's debate, Kezia Dugdale?
I wish we had learnt more. I think we want to see these debates focused around the facts, where there's a high-quality debate between the contenders. But realistically, that's not what they set out to do. They set out to communicate their key messages. So Boris Johnson wanted last night to pose some question marks over the Labour Party's Brexit policy. He did that successfully. Equally, Jeremy Corbyn went into the debate with a clear mission to raise the threat of the Tories selling the NHS off to Donald Trump's administration. Very successful at doing that. So given the strategies that both party leaders will have gone into that election debate with, I would think both of them will have come away quite happy.
Graham Davies, do you agree they'll both have come away feeling relatively happy with their performance? Where do you think they were at their strongest and also at their weakest?
Well, the ideal television political performer in a debate scenario is somebody who combines carefully controlled calculation at the core with a sprinkling of sparkling spontaneity over the top of it. And Jeremy Corbyn was one who managed to do that combination the most effectively.
He had the quickest responses in that quick-fire question round on the Christmas present, for example.
Absolutely. In the rather flawed debating format, he was the man who managed to adapt to the circumstances faster. He managed to do fast, crisp, punchy answers to questions and was able to generate rounds of applause and laughter. However, the biggest palpable hit was scored by Boris Johnson by continually pinning him down on whether he would vote for or support Leave or Remain in any future referendum. And what Jeremy Corbyn was doing was, instead of answering the question head-on, he would sidestep, go round in a circle and end up exactly where he started, leaving nothing of value in the middle. It's called a devil's donut, and he did that on 7, 8 or maybe even 9 occasions.
Do you think Boris Johnson's strategy, though, of repeating this message of get Brexit done, which he rammed home well and truly last night, regardless of what he was asked about, really, do you think that worked, or do you think the audience would have been thinking, OK, enough now?
I think it's a technique that belonged more in 2015 than 2019.
A Linton Crosby type.
Of Linton Crosby continually repeating, banging the audience over the head. But I think now, with the instant access to social media that we have 24 hours a day, the general viewing audience are wise to that ploy. And very quickly, constant repetition means that the politician who's doing the repeating becomes a parody of himself, his own spitting image puppet. It was almost as if he was going towards the disastrous repetition that we saw of Strong and Stable, and Boris Johnson was a graduate of the Theresa May school of political debating.
And in terms of their style and the preparation, Kezia Dugdale, you have spent hours, days behind the scenes advising politicians on their prep. How did they fare? What were their tactics and were they successful?
It's interesting, and it changes from one politician to another, the degree to which you prepare for events like this. You know, there's that famous Dolly Parton phrase about it takes a lot of money to look this cheap. When it comes to TV debates, I think it takes a lot of time to look this authentic. So there's been a lot of time being put into developing the policies, building the argument on the policies, and then building the language on the argument, those zingy one-liners, those little phrases that people remember. And I think repetition does work. You know, people might have been bored about hearing Boris Johnson repeatedly question Jeremy Corbyn's Brexit policy, but they will remember it, and if that's the thing he wants to land, then I'm afraid he did achieve that. Interestingly though, the YouGov poll, which showed Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn going 51 to 49, a slight win for Boris Johnson but within the margin of error, when you break that down and look at the detail of it, it's much more interesting. So Jeremy Corbyn won on being in touch with the voters and somebody who would be considered to be trustworthy, whilst the Prime Minister won on likeability, the sort of down the pub having a pint test, and he looked the most prime ministerial in the eyes of the voters. Now you might say that's because he's the Prime Minister, but detail like that I think shows us a lot more about what's really going on behind the scenes in terms of how the leaders portray themselves and want to be seen by the public.
And in terms of how they're seen by the public, no matter what preparation you do, no matter how crafted the answer is, it's often the little things that the public will notice. And on Twitter last night, there was a lot of distraction over Jeremy Corbyn's glasses, wasn't there? And also criticism of Boris Johnson for talking over the host, Julie Etchingham. Do those things alienate audiences?
I just think this is sideshow issues. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn's spoken quite openly about having an eye problem earlier this year. I think the glasses are attached to that particular issue. If we'd had two female leaders in front of us, we would all have been talking about what they were wearing. But, you know, if we spend airtime talking about that, we're really missing the point, and we should be focusing on the substantive issues at the heart of this election campaign, because at the end of the day, this is about who's going to govern over us for years to come.
Graham, just before we finish, what impact do you think last night's debate will have? It was historic because it was the first head-to-head between the two leaders that we have ever seen. Will it make a difference in the long term? Postal votes are going out, of course.
Of course they are. Well, going back to the origin of political TV debates in 1960, the Kennedy-Nixon debates, and since then, over the last 70 years, 60 years, we haven't really seen a debate that's made any major difference to the eventual result of any election in any country, and I think that's going to be the case.
Made a difference to Nick Clegg?
Maybe a little, but on the other hand, he actually lost a seat in that general election. He went down in 2010 from the 2005 total number of seats that the Lib Dems had. So it looked as though it made a difference in that election. In the end, it made no difference whatsoever.
OK, Graham Davies, Kezia Dugdale, thank you both very much indeed for your time this morning.